never see a brighter day. No mistakes, isn't too realistic. Vicious kind of shades, paper planes. God below the stars, is deep off in the main. Vivid pain, blinded by the rays. Still we love the shade. I've been up, I've been down. Sometimes I question myself. Sometimes I can't see what's left. What if loving never helped? Loving caused me stress. You never loved me like you said. Solitary left me broken hearted. Prophecy is dead. In the night, the skies could always start a spark. Into many eyes, dark places turn to light. With the switches side to side. We in the night, hidden from the light. In the night, the skies could always start a spark. Into many eyes, dark places turn to light. With the switches side to side. We in the night, hidden from the light. Vicious kind of shades. Vivid pain, blinded by the rays. Still we love the shade. Sometimes I question myself. What if loving never helped? Solitary left me broken hearted. Prophecy is death. In the night, the skies could always start a spark. Into many eyes, dark places turn to light. With the switches side to side. We in the night, hidden from the light. In the night, the skies could always start a spark. Into many eyes, dark places turn to light. With the switches side to side. We in the night, hidden from the light. I fear to say, some of us might never see a brighter day. No mistakes, isn't too realistic. Vicious kind of shades, paper planes. God below the stars, is deep off in the main. Vivid pain, blinded by the rays.
Welcome to this month's Boston Public Library Reading Together book discussion. Today we're going to be talking about Patron Saints of Nothing by Randy Ribay. Right there. I am Laura. I am a teen librarian at the Central Branch of Boston Public Library, and I am here with my colleague.
I'm Allie. I am the Youth Services Librarian at the Brighton Branch of the Boston Public Library.
I'm Danny. I'm a teen librarian alongside Laura at Teen Central at Copley.
And I'm Jackie. I am a youth services librarian at the Adam Street branch, which will open soon, hopefully.
Yay!
So our theme for this month was Own Voices, which means a book that is about a person who is of the same identity as the author. I don't know, Allie, do you have a better definition than that?
So sorry, I'm watching Yorkie.
My cat is in the background causing mayhem.
She's just going for it. Sorry. We know that you can't see it, but oh my god, Yorkie! No! Anyways, Own Voices was it started kind of like, so you see it a lot stylized as the hashtag Own Voices, because it started as a way to identify books that were not like super accurate, but they were like, they didn't necessarily have to be accurate, but they were true to that person's experience of being part of that community. And like, to like give you a specific of something that's not Own Voices that we celebrate a lot is Snowy Day by Ezra Klein, is actually written by a white person, but it was the first book to feature a Black protagonist in picture books. So that would not be considered Own Voices because he was writing about an experience he did not live. But books like Patron Saints of Nothing by Randy Ribay has an element of that person being part of the community they are writing about.
Exactly. Perfect. And so our book for this month is Patron Saints of Nothing by Randy Ribay. It is about the experience of a Filipino American teenager He's getting ready to graduate from high school, and he's kind of feeling like a little bit lost, a little bit at odds with what he wants to do. And then he gets the news that this cousin, who he used to be really close to, who lives back in the Philippines, has been killed. And it comes up that it had something to do with drugs, and he just really has a lot of trouble accepting this. So he decides to go back, visit his family, and try to figure out what really happened to his cousin. So this is definitely going to be like a little bit of a heavier stream to discuss. Maybe that's why the cat is in the background, just really causing mayhem to bring some levity here. We're falling apart.
Oh my god.
But yes, so besides the cat, this is going to be a serious stream. We're going to be talking about some serious issues of, drugs, violence, sexual violence. So trigger warning for all of those things. But I don't know if before we get started with the quotes, if everyone just kind of wanted to give maybe like a one sentence of what you thought about the book, just to kind of organize us into it. Danny, do you want to go first since you're below me?
Oh, sure. Oh, dang. It was written really well. I had a lot of gasp moments. I cried. I learned a lot, and I got angry. But I think in like I want to know the truth kind of way. So, and I'm not a fiction, especially YA fiction reader, but I'm glad I read this book.
What about you, Jackie?
I was not prepared for this book at all. It was an emotional roller coaster, but I loved it. And I think coming from someone who maybe like also didn't necessarily like feel that in touch with like where my family comes from, I was like, okay, yeah, this is all legit.
Yeah, I don't know what I thought this book was about. Like, I was the one who recommended this for the book that we chose for the whole community to read, and I don't think that I fully remembered like what this book was about, because it was heartbreaking to read, and it perfectly captures the kind of anger you feel when systems work against you and you feel helplessly lost within them. And I learned a lot from this book that I didn't know about what was happening in the Philippines, like politically and socioeconomically, and I don't think that I'll ever forget this book.
Definitely, I agree with what Danny said, that this was just like a really well-written book. It's not necessarily like the type of book that I would tend to pick up on my own, just because of how like heavy and serious it is. I think particularly this year, that's not necessarily what I've been looking for in my books, but I thought it was like really well written. Like you guys said, I feel like I learned a lot, and I can understand why it's so well reviewed and people seem to really love it so much. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, before the stream started, Danny asked, like, she was just like reconfirming for herself that this book was fiction, and I found myself also having to reconfirm that, because it is so grounded in like reality and truth. And there's a really great author's note at the back that talks about some of that, but it did feel like one of those books that as you're reading it, it felt more autobiographical than it did fiction in a lot of places. And definitely. I think that is chalked up to like extraordinary writing, like so good. Incredible.
Absolutely. All right, so I kind of tried to structure our format for this so that we start with some of the heavier stuff and end with maybe kind of like the lightest topics. So we're going to start right out today talking about how this book deals with grief and death and just some real bummer topics.
Yeah.
So the first thing that I pulled out that kind of spoke to me I was in kind of like, I've been in kind of a cycle where every book I've been picking up seems to be about grief and death, which is interesting, but they've all been really good. And the first quote I pulled out here is, at that point in my life, I had encountered death only in fiction. I had heard about other people's relatives dying, but I had never seen death up close. I had never held it. And I just thought this was like such a true explanation of what life is like for someone, particularly growing up like in the suburbs like he does, when you're faced with your first real loss.
Was this when he was talking about when he was in the Philippines and holding the puppy, the dead puppy? That's where this came from? Yeah.
I think so. Which was what a way to start a book.
Yep.
Yeah, the book starts, we open on a scene where he is like talking about when he was a kid, this dog, this puppy dying, like basically in his arms, and his cousin June comforting him. And then you get out of the prologue, and in chapter 1, you find out June has now died. So it's just like, it's really just a feel-good rom-com. Everyone should have a good time. No, it's
And
very sad.
June was like the only one who comforted him. Everyone was like, whatever, like, everyone dies. Get over it.
Yeah, I think that really speaks to this of like, to him, he'd only seen death in like Disney movies and stuff, and to these cousins who weren't empathizing with him, who are living a more difficult life than him, it was just kind of like, this is a fact of life, and if you get this upset over a dog that failed to thrive, like, you're not gonna make it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to revisit this quote after having read the whole book too, because of
Oh my God.
the ways in which his relatives do end up, like when we see a human death occur, and the ways that, you know, his grief manifests, and he like tries to express it, and the relatives are all just like, it's pointless to feel this way. And for him, it's not pointless. Like, this is what he's experiencing. And it just feels like, you know, for him, his first 2 instances of real grief are so entwined in this like being protected from other instances of grief, and everyone else is just so overexposed to it that they can't empathize anymore.
Yeah, I think you get those. So for the majority of the people that are in Jay's life are in that category, right? They're so exposed to this kind of life that it no longer phases them. So having that person in his life, I think it's like the thing that I found most powerful about this whole book is just like that reminder of like that moment when like you first realize that the world is not easy or great for a lot of people, and June just kind of like epitomizing that entire experience.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, because it's not even just his family in the Philippines that have this perspective, but also his parents both work in the medical field. So for both of them too, this is something that they're just facing every day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, it does kind of remind you of the way we've kind of handled the death and grief surrounding all of the people that have passed away during COVID, in that the numbers at this point are so large that you can't like fathom them. You don't have it in you as a person to mourn all of those people, and you become almost desensitized to it, like the strangers, even though those people are people. And that seems to be like what happened to everybody in his family, with kind of the exception of him at this point when we meet him.
So the next quote that we pulled is on the similar topic. And this is, I think, when he finds out that June has passed away, and he's kind of trying to figure out how he feels. There's only a mild confusion, a muddy feeling of unreality that thickens when I consider the distance that had developed between June and me. How do you mourn someone you already let slip away? Are you even allowed to? Which again, like, oof, heavy but real.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the context for this is that he and June remained pen pals for many years after Jay last saw him, which was the incident with the puppy, as we talked about. They remained pen pals for many years after that, and then they eventually kind of stopped. Well, Jay stopped writing back, and so that's what he's talking about when he says like the distance that had already come between them. Yeah, it's kind of like hearing about somebody you used to be really good friends with that you kind of didn't talk to anymore, like processing how do you mourn for that person when you don't know necessarily who they were at the end.
And I think he, throughout, seems to kind of blame himself a little bit for the fact that he let this relationship drift away. And that I think when you read June's letters to him, you can really feel that there's something going on that he obviously didn't pick up on because he was like a young teenager too. But it comes out that he essentially like let this relationship drift off because he was a young teenager who got his first girlfriend, and that took up all of his energy, which you can't blame him for that. That's a very normal experience, but that really adds to this level of like responsibility and grief that he puts on himself.
I think for me, both those quotes put together, outside like, different countries, different experience, but for me, like that really like hit. Where like, okay, this is one of those things of markers of like, coming of age, like as you grow up, like the things that you notice, like, sorry to be like a deadbeat downer, but like that's the thing that increases of like, okay, like now there's that first funeral of like someone who wasn't a family member, who's just a friend, but snaps, and then things that you were so innocent to before, then that are now just rocketed in your brain and in your heart. Like, I gotta be ready for this going forward in life.
Yeah, I think that loss of innocence is like a really big theme in this book. In a lot of ways, he's forced to face how naive and kind of sheltered he has been, which we will talk about in some more context later. So the last quote that I pulled about grieving, I don't know if Allie has any others, but was just, I remind myself that he's dead, that I'll never have the chance to write him again, but it's difficult to drop an anchor in that reality. And I don't know, I just really liked that kind of metaphor of feeling kind of like at sea and you just can't ground yourself to the reality that someone is gone. I think particularly because he wasn't seeing this person every day, and like as you grow up and these people, you aren't seeing them as often, so it can be harder to kind of recognize within yourself that they're gone. I don't know.
Yeah, I also think there's, in kind of the same vein of what you're saying, there's this idea like with Jay that he always thought he would write June again. Like, and he didn't expect that June, who's his age, and in the story that's 17, he didn't expect that he would not get to fix that relationship before one of them died, because that's so unexpected and so young and tragic and awful. But like, it's something you learn kind of as an adult. And like, I'm still learning that, is to try to fix it all as soon as possible because you don't want to lose the chance. And like,
Jesus.
This is a really fun book to talk about.
We told you it's heavy.
I do like that. Oh, go ahead.
Nope, God, nope.
I do like that last quote, especially because it's talking about the letters and like the act of writing to each other. And I feel like throughout the whole book, those letters were like such an anchor for Jay as he's trying to figure out what happened to his cousin. So I like that.
Yeah, I have one more quote. I missed the quote deadline, but I have a quote. But this is, when people, I hope that none of you have experienced this yet, but if you have, when people in your life die, you search for answers a little bit. You want reasons for why this happened to them. And for Jay, he doesn't get reasons. His dad says that Jay was killed by the police in the Philippines for using drugs, and Jay doesn't believe that, and so he needs to prove to himself that there's more here than what happened. He needs to have a justification for June's death that makes sense to him. And he goes to the Philippines after like being explicitly told by his father not to mention June because the family doesn't talk about June anymore in the Philippines. They haven't since he ran away from home. But basically Jay goes there and he just like wants answers about this. And so there's a quote that says, I want to know about June's life, but maybe I gave up that right when I stopped writing him back, when I let him slip from my thoughts so easily. Who was I to step off the plane and demand anything of this place? And I think that's, you try to re-enter the world that you shared with the person that you lost and demand answers of it. And sometimes there are no answers.
And we have some quotes later in when we're talking more about family, just about like kind of how he goes in there and the expectations that he has versus what he meets. That's like a good preview to that.
I love to be filled with rage when I read books. It just,
Yep.
it's what keeps me going.
So our next topic, just more downer, talking about some of the really tough stuff that's going on once he gets to the Philippines. And Jay grew up in, I think, like a suburban town in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So this whole world is very unfamiliar to him.
Yeah, he was born in the Philippines, right? And then they left when he was like 1 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the first one we have here is when he's kind of researching things and trying to just learn more when he realizes that he really doesn't know very much about his country's history. It was these photographers didn't want to water it down. They wanted the audience to confront the reality, to feel the pain that's been numbed by a headline culture.
Oof.
And again, like rough, but I think interesting in a way of that's kind of what this book serves to do in its own way as well.
I definitely agree with that. I think headline culture is like a pretty good way to put it. And we've talked a little bit already about the I'm not going to say it. You all know what I mean. Desensitization. There it is. Towards like violence and death and horrible things. And the internet really just lets us stream nightmares into our brains. And like we process like catastrophic grief at almost all times. And that is just not anything I think the human psyche can deal with. And so in this particular situation, right, they to call attention to everything that's happening, it has to be photographs. It has to be like living in color proof that this is what's happening. This is what life is like, because we've all just become so desensitized to headlines of awful things. What a fun place we live in the world.
More thoughts on this? Do you want to?
I'm thinking about how, like, culturally, like, we have slasher and gore movies, and like that's something like we just it's a fun night. It's a theater night. Like it's a you can scare yourself, but to see it, how like to us that's just a movie, and to somebody like that's someone's reality. That's every other day. Who's gonna stumble onto severed this and that. Like, just come back,
Yeah.
This book definitely served to give you a way in to that world that was not something you'd already hardened yourself against.
Yeah, I think it's also important. I know this is something that's like discussed around true crime a lot, is putting the focus on the victim or the sufferers, the people, instead of on, the people who are committing the crimes. And that's obviously like a little bit different than what we're seeing here, but I think this book did do a really good job, which we're going to kind of go on to talk about a little bit more in these upcoming quotes, of really showing, why people do what they do and why we shouldn't be judging people who end up in difficult situations. So the next one that we pulled is about a woman who he goes to meet when he is trying to figure out what happened to June. and he's with a friend of his cousin's secret girlfriend who is helping him to kind of follow this track. They go into the slums of the city with this girl's professor to meet this woman that they find out June had been living with, and she had been a sex worker, and he at first is having a lot of trouble understanding why, when things got tough for her again, she didn't go back to his aunt who runs an organization to help sex workers who are looking to get out of that and into some other field. And he just can't understand why she would strike out on his own. So Mia, the girl he's with, she says, "You haven't been in her situation, Jay." Mia tells me with more anger than I expect, "You never will be, or you will never be, so you can't possibly understand. Don't be so quick to judge." And we talk about this a lot with drugs and addiction in this book, which are the next couple things we're going to talk about. But this one really just stuck out to me, and I thought it was important to include because I do think that that is something that people are very quick to judge on. And Mia makes a very good point of, you don't understand her life circumstances. You could never be in this situation that she's in. It's not your place to make judgments on the decisions that she made in her own life.
Yeah, I think that the reason why this book is so impactful is because we're getting it from Jay's perspective. So even the quote before, just like, he grew up in a place that, you know, is predominantly white. It sounds like middle class or better. And like, even among his friends at home, like, he admits to not ever talking about emotions with his best friend Seth. Like, they just don't do that. Everything's kind of like superficial on the surface. And like, being able to see, you know, the situation with I think her name was Raina. Yeah.
Raina.
Seeing it from his perspective, where he's like, well, why didn't she just like ask for help, or why didn't she get out of the situation? It's like that, like, being that naive, I think, is like a reminder, especially like for, you know, people who may not necessarily be exposed to that kind of reality every day, like, being able to see that that is a naive way to think about it, because we don't know what people are going through.
Yeah, there's a quote right after this moment too, I'm pretty sure, where Mia reminds Jay not to make it about himself.
Yeah.
And like, not about what he can fix or can't fix, or what his opinion is about the choices that the people who live in the Philippines have to make to survive. And I think that's really important. Like, Jay doesn't live like this. He's more than a tourist, because it is his home, but he is a tourist through their lives right now. And he can't just sweep in and fix everything. And something I liked about the book was that Jay didn't have answers, and Jay didn't just come in and fix everything. Even though, God, I do wish that we, you know, got happier endings and stories, and that there was a way to like fix this. But the truth of the matter is that you can't always fix things, and you just have to listen to the stories of the people who are experiencing these things with no judgment.
Yeah, and I think he does kind of learn that the best thing he can do is support the people there, like Mia, who is a budding journalist, like his cousin, who's taken up the mantle of the social media page that June was running to kind of name the victims who have been killed for being involved with drugs. That by supporting those initiatives, and like the people on the ground there, that's what's really helpful. Such a bummer.
This book was so necessary and so reminiscent of, I think, a lot of the problems that not only still exist in the Philippines, but exist in pockets of America where we all live, and exist in pockets of Boston where we all live, to
Yeah.
get even smaller. And I think this book is a great way into, and a great way to relate to the feelings that you're experiencing about sometimes feeling helpless in the faces of systems that continuously fail the same people over and over and over, and then villainize those people instead of framing them as survivors or as people who need help. And I think that's an important distinction to make, maybe more so after yesterday than
Yeah,
ever before.
absolutely. So this kind of leads us into the discussion of addiction, which is the big storyline in the book, because that is what happened to June. He got addicted to drugs and was killed by the police, the government, because of that. And Jay just cannot accept this. And even though I could kind of see where the book was heading, it really was hard for me for a lot of the early book, just how many moral judgments Jay was making about addiction, in terms of like, well, June couldn't have been an addict. He couldn't have been using drugs because he was a good person. And I could see that probably eventually he was going to learn that being a good person and dealing with addiction are not mutually exclusive at all. But it was still, it was rough watching him get there a little bit. So the first one is when he's talking, I believe, to his uncle who's a religious figure. You see, it's cheaper than food, so many of the poor start for this reason, and then they become addicted. And I think this is talking about meth, which is the drug that we are mostly seeing in this book. And I think this is a really important moment for Jay, because it's the first time he really starts to understand how this happened to June, and that this really was a reality, and the ways in which addiction is not just addiction, but it's a symptom of the fact that we are not making food affordably and readily available. So people have to go to drugs, which are cheaper and suppress their appetites, and just the ways in which, like, the way that society is set up are forcing these difficult choices onto people. Oof.
It's okay. I try to look ahead. So I just want to speak to this in like a cultural sense of, so my parents, they were born in Mexico, and growing up, like, when there was food in front of your plate, like, you were not allowed to leave that table. And to see that, you know, so many of the poor start for this reason, then they become addicted. Like, you know, they always told us, like, you don't know what being hungry is. And to see that quote, it's like, yeah, you don't know what being hungry is. Like, if you'd rather use something to forget, like, just how empty your tummy is, like, yeah, you have no right to judge. But yeah, that's what I have to say about that quote.
It's impossible choices after, it's like an impossible choice after an impossible choice after an impossible choice. And, you know, it's easy, I think, sometimes for people to just assign morality to choices to justify their own choices, and to, you know, make themselves feel better about choices that they maybe have made. And the truth of the matter is that addiction is something that can happen to anyone. It's genetic just as much as it is circumstance. And for June, it was probably a combination of both. He was, you know, hungry, poor, and out of options. So he made an impossible choice for himself and was unable to find recovery or seek help for what he needed. And it's heartbreaking. And if you haven't read it, June comes from a family that's pretty wealthy. Like his dad is the chief of police in his neighborhood. And they have like this beautiful luxurious house, and they have meals made for them all the time. And the parents are always saying to the kids, like, you don't know how lucky you have it, you don't know how good your life is here. And then finally, when June strikes out on his own, it's almost even more heartbreaking, because his parents were right. Like, he didn't know what it was like for any of this. And we see Jay figure that all out in the same way I think we would have seen June figure it out if we had followed him through the book instead.
It also definitely shows, I think, like particularly the fact that he comes from this wealthy family but still can't get help, that the way we allocate resources and the moral judgments which we place on people really exacerbate things like addiction or exploitative sex work. Because if you're placing those judgments on people and focusing on punishing them, then you're not giving them shame-free options to either engage in that behavior safely or to recover from it. So the last one we've got here is just kind of what we've been talking about, but this ultimate realization that Jay finally comes to, that just because he was a user, a pusher, it doesn't mean that his life was worthless. It doesn't mean that there wasn't good in him. And I was very glad that he finally came to this realization, because like we've been discussing, that is true.
So June is also being watched by the government because he runs, Laura talked about this a little bit, the Instagram page that shows the faces of the people who are lost to like the people who are killed by the police in an effort to like clean up and fix the Philippines under this administration. And he runs it so that there can be faces with those names that you just hear, or like people don't even get the acknowledgement of like their loved one being killed because it's such like a culturally shameful way. Lost my train of thought. But Jay talks about how after this fact, the good works that June put into the world, he feels like tipped the scales for June, like in like what he could bring to the universe. Like June was a good person, and it didn't matter that he used drugs because June had a good heart. And like I feel like that was so important, and he wanted to carry on June's work because it acknowledged that the work and the person that you are does not need to be changed because of addiction. Whether you are ready to seek help or not, it doesn't change that you are a good person still. And I think that was really important.
I think there is a world where in this book, like, you find out that June was not a drug user, did not sell drugs, and you have Jay figuring out that he was killed simply because he was trying to stand against this like war on drugs and this regime that exists in the Philippines. And I feel like it wouldn't have been as effective as it was.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to have Jay realize that despite this, like, his cousin was a good person. I think that was like one of the most important parts of the book.
Yeah, and honestly, even if June had turned out to be like a pretty bad person, or he hadn't really created that page or like done any of that, people don't deserve to die like just in the street because somebody made an accusation against you or because the government sees you as less than. That is not okay. And it's hard to read books like this because you see the parallels with what is happening here at home, and to know this is also happening other places. There is such a solidarity in that for those of us that are trying or who are hopefully trying to make the world a better place. There's like this idea that we are all one people fighting against this, like these moral judgments that people in power apply to you.
I feel like this quote definitely can come home, and knowing how, a lot of teens are aware of so many things, like so many problems, and they feel so alone in that, and how much self-medicating like plays into that. They're not bad people, but sometimes like just finding some safety, or just making it go away for a little bit, like it ends up just being that path, and it doesn't make them bad people. It just want to feel something.
The world is a very hard place sometimes, and we would hope that there are resources in place to help you if you need help. Our teen listeners out there know that BPL, like, while we are not necessarily equipped to help with everything, we can hopefully connect you with people who are. So you can always reach out if you find yourself in need of something. But, every life is worth something, and it's never okay for that life to be snuffed out, regardless of status.
Perfect. So Chris is dropping the email in the chat if you guys ever need advice on finding resources of whatever sort. We are here to help. So that concludes like the most like serious heavy part. Now we're going to move on and talk a little bit about identity and family, which is still very serious and real, but hopefully a little bit less depressing. So what I thought,
should we do like a stretch break? Should we all just like, do a little move in? Ugh, good job, everybody.
Untense the shoulders real
Yeah,
fast.
unclench your jaw. Maybe take a sip of water.
Self-care break.
Yeah.
I thought like right from the very first page, the dedication, the book was dedicated, I think, to all the hyphens or all the hyphenates or something, like dedicating it to people like the author and the main character who have these intersecting identities, which I thought that was a great dedication. I love a good dedication page. But yeah, you can kind of pick up what we've been talking about. His identity as an immigrant who was born in the Philippines or really grew up in the US is a big part of who he is. So we have a lot of quotes here. We'll try to get through at least most of them. So at the end, we can talk a little bit just about like the high school stuff. But the first one was about his first trip to the Philippines coming back. A few days later, the vacation ended. I flew back to pine trees, overcast skies, in a Michigan winter that could sputter till May. My tan faded. My tongue forgot the taste of Tocino and Tagalog.
I think it's pretty telling that, he sees his trips to the Philippines as a vacation instead of, and I think that changes a lot when he goes to find out what happened to June, because he says it feels a little bit like coming home now instead. And he, to reuse the metaphor, but he said that like he feels like a tourist, but it also feels like more because this was where he was born. This is where his family is. And I think it's such a different approach to this idea of like, oh, vacation's over, time to go back to my real life, like not in the Philippines. And it's such a different, I mean, at the end of the book, he decides to go spend a gap year in the Philippines, getting reacquainted with his family and his culture that he feels like he's lost. So not a vacation anymore, that's for sure.
Yeah, like the whole book, he's kind of struggling with this, like who he is and how he is able to present himself to the world. And like there's kind of like a bit of shame I feel like coming from him because he, didn't take the time to learn the language. He didn't keep in touch with his family. Like I think the place that he's in at the end of the book is like such a drastically different place.
Yes.
And like such a good place for him. That was like one of the only like moments where I was like, oh, okay, like I can take a breath. This is like a happy feeling.
But his uncle and his aunt pushing it, like, to tell him, like, shaming him also.
Right,
like, oh,
right.
you don't know this. You're not one of us.
Instead of
mean-
like trying to welcome someone, like it's a very like you have no idea because you abandoned your people, basically.
Mhm.
Yeah, as if his 1-year-old, like this 1-year-old could have been like, no, I'm gonna stay. Like he had to, and I think that's something that immigrant children I think often experience, right? Is you suffer the sins of your fathers, like when you return home. And like I can't speak to that because I am not the child of immigrants, but in this book in particular, they kept being like, oh, well, your father ran away, so like why don't you just do the same thing? And it feels like no matter what Jay does, he carries this with him, even though it's
Mhm.
not a choice he made for himself and he is a different person than his father. It doesn't seem to matter.
So the next two I might just kind of read and then move on so that we can kind of get through stuff, because I think they're both pretty similar to what we just talked about. But so we've got, as we pass the 2 and 3 story homes with their manicured lawns and 2-car garages, I can't help but remember those photographs of the drug war. It seems impossible that a place like this and a place like the Philippines exist at the same time on the same planet, which I think similarly to what we were just talking about, but this one also struck out to me because like you don't live that far away from Detroit. Like things like this are happening closer to home than I think you realize. So that was that. And the next one is just that it's like I only know half of myself, which again, that's just a very clear statement of what we've been talking about, what we're going to keep talking about as these quotes go on.
I would like to say I do think it's a little bit funny that he threw that out there to guilt trip his parents into letting him go on this trip. I think
Hey, you gotta
him
do what you gotta do.
like weaponizing his parents' choices and the like guilt that he experiences because in this like loss of identity he experiences because of it, and just going, well, if we'd stayed in the Philippines, I wouldn't feel like this, and like the parents having to be like, well, what am I supposed to say to them? Here's my credit card. Like, I did think that was a little bit funny because he goes, I think the line right before that is like, I break out like the big one.
Yeah.
It feels like I only know half of it. Like he's manipulating his parents, but it is like a real thing he's feeling. But when in that moment, that quote is him being like, pay for my plane ticket, mom and dad. Do it. Do it. Do it.
I think it's also like super interesting how we see parts of Jay's dad and like how the family in the Philippines kind of treats Jay's dad, and he he just like quietly like accepts every time like his uncle says something snarky about abandoning his family and his country. Like I think it was like interesting to watch Jay have to deal with that kind of criticism of his father and of himself. I really hated his uncle.
God, the worst. The worst.
Oh my god, yeah.
He was like mildly better by the end, but like he made me so angry.
Blood boiled. His day on.
He was described so well. Like I could see him.
Oh
yes.
Yep.
I mean, great writing, but
oh yeah.
Oh.
So the next 2 quotes I'm going to read at the same time and then we can discuss.
Good luck, Chris.
So these are him coming back to the Philippines for this trip that we've been talking about this whole time. So first we have, as soon as I step out of the plane, the scent of Manila hits me. It's a smell I've forgotten, I know, but its familiarity rushes back in an instant. And then, surely the air your lungs first breathe matters, the language your ears first hear, the foods your nose first smells and your tongue first tastes, the soil you first crawl upon. Beautiful writing.
Gorgeous. Just gorgeous writing the whole time.
That second quote was like, it came like towards the end of the book. And I felt like I was like really proud of Jay for like being like, no, it matters. Like, it matters that I am from here and that I was born here, and even though I didn't grow up here, like, I am still Filipino. Like, I was super proud of him for that.
Yeah. Little buddy.
I think there definitely is that when you are like 1 or 2 generations removed, like he is, that you can kind of have this sense of like, maybe I feel connected to parts of this, but I don't feel like I deserve to because I haven't experienced it the way other people have. It sounds like, I think you guys, Danny and Jackie, have both like kind of touched on that a little bit. I know like my father was first born in the US, and so I definitely can like feel that too, that there are parts of I feel connected to that culture, but like, can I claim it because I never lived there? So I think definitely that's real. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
I think something that makes it harder too is that the rest of his family is still there on his dad's side, and this is not at all comparable, but like my whole family still lives in the same town that they all grew up in, and I am one of the only people that have moved away, and I'm not even far. I'm an hour. And the way that it's treated as if I like just don't ever know what's going on, and like, why does it matter? Like, not necessarily like it doesn't matter what I think, but the ways in which I am not privy to conversations and decisions because I made a choice to leave in their eyes. And it does feel like this family unit has closed ranks and you're on the outside of it now. And so how do you go back, even though that's where you're from? How do you prove that you deserve to be there too, even though you left? We're having fun. We're having fun. We're having fun.
All right, do you guys want to talk about his family members real quick, or do we have more thoughts on this? I know we have thoughts on his family.
Yes, we do.
So the first one was just about his dad, which Jackie already touched on quite a lot, I think. That I may not have learned to speak my native language from him, but I learned to keep the most important things inside, which you very succinctly described how that is apparent in this book.
Glad him and his dad kind of get to have a better relationship at the end of the book. That was nice.
Yeah.
A little happy ending on that plot point.
Oh, yeah.
His dad definitely like means well and is just trying to figure out how to manage his own guilt, I think. Like, you find out that he's doing things for his family in the Philippines that Jay didn't even know about, and it seems like he feels like he just has to provide and take it because he left.
No, I like that he learned throughout the book, like, his dad was just this quiet hero. It's not like he wasn't doing anything, because I'm sure his dad felt, a tinge of guilt of like, okay, I left them behind, but he was trying so hard in different little ways that he could, of like, okay, funding, helping with the school, helping with the organization.
Yes.
And it's great that he got to learn that, on this trip. And I just don't see his dad ever like, he wouldn't, he's quiet, but also like humble. Like, he wouldn't just, he's not like his older brother. Like, I've done this and I've done that, and he just does good things because they're good things, not because he needs the glory.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad he learned that about his dad.
Yeah.
And even his parents being some of the biggest donors to his aunt's foundation, I think, like, also showing, like we talked about before, that the best thing you can do to help is support the people who live there and know what's going on and are helping because they are living it. So that was good. So let's talk about his uncle.
No.
This whole thing was wild because, like, on the one hand, his uncle is the worst, but also what a wild thing to do, to be like, I'm going to go to the Philippines and my cousin just died and I'm going to confront his parents because I know they're lying about what happened. Like, oh boy.
The confidence, the confidence of this child.
Yep. So his uncle was like really rough, like you guys have talked about, really like challenging him and not supporting him. But they have this confrontation, and his uncle says, "You do not live here. You do not speak any of our languages. You do not know our history. Your mother is a white American, yet you presume to speak to me as if you knew anything about me, as if you knew anything about my son, as if you knew anything about this country." And this was like the only time in the entire book that I thought his uncle was correct.
So I get that, but I
True.
also am like, bro, you didn't even know your son. Like, like, and your perspective of the country that you live in, like, is I guess affected by his place in that society, but like it doesn't necessarily mean that it reflects the reality of what's going on. So like I get his point, but I'm also still mad at him.
100%.
Yeah, I also think there is a few times that Manning uses Jay's lack of like Filipino connection to just like shut down conversations he doesn't want to have.
Yeah.
Like Jackie said, Manning didn't know his son at all, literally at all. Like June used to send Jay letters that were like, "My dad sucks times 10," like, and talk about the ways in which, and like we observe it, the ways in which Manning like is controlling and almost abusive in his household. And so while he's making points, he's not doing it for good reasons.
No.
He's doing it because he sucks, turns out.
Yeah.
And
And like he also
control.
Yeah, like the fact that he wants to maintain control, but he obviously failed at that. Like his daughters have secret phones and secret social media accounts. His daughter has a secret girlfriend. Like you are not on top of it, sir.
Oh, absolutely not. Doesn't matter what language you speak, you do not speak the language of your children.
That's right.
And his whole idea of like how to teach Jay about the country is like, we're going to go to these museums and I'm only going to show you the lower floors that deal with the history that I want you to know. I'm not going to show you anything about like the activism or the revolution. You want to go upstairs and see that? No, that's not important.
It's trash. The modern art is trash.
Ugh. Danny's
love
like, this man
I'm
does.
gay aunts. I
thankful
love
for
the
him.
gay aunts.
Oh my god, they're the best.
The what? The who?
The gay aunt.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, Jackie, I interrupted you. You were thankful for Manning?
I'm thankful for him because he gave me an emotion that was not like grief and sadness to latch onto.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so the last quote we have here, I think, just kind of like wraps this section up. Jay's like real learning. It strikes me that I cannot claim this country's serene coves and sun-soaked beaches without also claiming its poverty, its problems, its history, which I think we all need to take to heart about our own country as well. What a message.
I stopped reading with that one and I like sat with that for a while. I was just like, yeah, you know, this is kind of how you, like, I feel like my approach to my own home country is now, and even my own city. Like, you can't be like, oh, this is really great without acknowledging, number one, the atrocities that had to happen for you to achieve that status. And number two, the terrible things that are still happening that just get glossed over for the sake of being like, well, it's so good.
Oh.
Don't think about that. No, it's so good. You know, so
Yeah.
this quote hit.
I feel like this is something like my parents were both they both immigrated here, and I feel like it's true of a lot of immigrants. They like to think back about the home country as like, oh well, people really got things back there, like you know, especially this like divide between the home country and America, and like people seeing that things here are easier than they were back there, but there's like a sense of like a badge of honor to coming from that. I think there's like a lot of glossing over some of the history that we come from to have that perspective. So yeah, no, I definitely sat with this one too for a little bit. Oh, it is almost 4.
We're listening to Chris's disembodied voice.
So we'll try to go through the rest of the stuff pretty quickly. We just have a couple quotes about like high school, graduation, moving on to the future. So just this kind of idea that we'll end things on a slightly lighter note. So he says the future is a wall of fog obscuring the horizon when he's talking about graduating high school, which is like dramatic, but also mood. He says everyone acts like 17-year-olds who don't have their career path mapped out are wasting their lives.
False.
And then when he's talking to Mia, I believe.
What that is to feel when you're in high school, though.
Doctor. I wanted to be a Me?
Yes. I went through a whole graduate degree. I didn't know what I wanted to do till I was in my like late to mid 20s.
Can you imagine you are there, you're at the hospital, you're not feeling good, and then I walk in the door. Do you feel better? No.
What kind of doctor?
Oh my god, the worst kind. I wanted to be a pediatric oncologist.
Allie,
oh
my
god, Allie.
What? Was 17? You want me to pick a life path at 17? And like, yeah, did I like kind of figure out what I was called to do younger than most people? Sure. Was it what I thought it was going to be? Absolutely not.
Nah. I feel that though. I went into college like, okay, gotta go to college because that's what everybody says I gotta do.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll figure it out then. But even as I was in line, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go with undecided. But even like as I was in line to go to undecided, I was like, no, like I have to pick something. Like so people say I have to pick something, so
right.
I picked something. Took a class and I was like, no, I'm gonna pick something else. So guys, you can be at your line, picking your major, and it's still gonna change. And that's what everyone's gonna tell you in college. Like your major's not gonna stay the major you wanted. So, at 17, it's okay.
Was in undergrad, and I remember the phone call. I called my mom and I said, so, turns out I want to be a librarian. And my mom was like, okay, can you transfer to a less expensive school? And I was like, well, I'm already here, so no.
I'm just going to say.
Oh.
But, which is like its own kind of privilege, right? But I definitely had that moment of like having a conversation with my mom where I was like, oh, remember how I had like this whole life plan? Turns out, no, I don't want to do that. And that was after I'd already decided not to become a doctor.
Yeah, I was like a rare person who stuck with my major from the beginning, but I majored in Russian literature and languages, Slavic literature and languages, which is like very random and not necessarily setting you up for a specific career path. But I do not regret that at all because I like had fun learning. I gained some skills in like critical thinking and research and stuff that helps you with any job. So I don't know. I just like that there was this message in this book of find your passion, follow your passion. If you don't know what your passion is right now, take time to go find it. Like that's okay.
Yes.
If you are a teenager and you don't know what you want to do, that is normal. If you're a teenager and you think what you thought you wanted to do is changing, that is normal. Like,
yep.
Don't
now
be
say the same.
out.
Now say the same thing about being 26. Do it.
Same
say,
thing.
Allie.
I mean, that was my literal life, Allie. I truly lived that. So I do agree with that.
Yeah, take a gap year if you need to. Don't tell your parents I told you to take a gap year, but take a gap year. Figure it out.
The last thing that I have to talk about, I don't know why I put this after the high school stuff because it's more of a downer, but it was about
so sad when you were like, we're going to end on a high.
Yeah,
I was like, this quote, and I was like,
his best friend at home, Seth, who we already talked about that they don't talk about their emotions. And Seth just like does not understand any of this stuff. And he says about their friendship, it's a sad thing when you map the borders of friendship. and find it's a narrower country than expected. And Seth was like the most white boy who thinks he means well but is really messing it up that there could ever be. But I also thought this was interesting. Allie and I on our like Bookstagram recommendations on Friday talked about how friend breakups and the like moving on from friends in your childhood is something that we're seeing a lot more in young adult fiction, and how that's like a very small part of this. Although I guess you do kind of see it with Jen too, but it's like so real and so hard.
Coffee's making the new bed.
Oh, another cat, but the different cat behind me.
Oh.
I don't know.
And it's interesting because that quote I think came like very like near the beginning, and even though we don't see much of their interactions after Jay leaves for the Philippines, like I kind of like I'm proud of Jay again for like recognizing that like maybe Seth isn't the best friend, or maybe they weren't the best friends for each other, like, and he is okay with that, I think.
Yeah, definitely. That's like shows a lot of maturity.
Yeah.
I can't believe I did a whole whole thing on friendship and we didn't talk about Mia at all. We're not going to start. We're not going to start.
A little bit about Mia. Do we have any closing thoughts beyond this was tough, but we recommend it?
This is like the first book that's made me cry in a while.
Yeah. I really loved this. This is a book I talked about to like people who haven't read it. I was like, oh my God, do you know about this book? Let me tell you about this book. So like,
I was talking to people who like, they don't really read, and they definitely don't read YA fiction. Like, I was like, there's like a part, sorry, I got really excited. There is a part where someone mentions a poem, and that poem that they mentioned, I think it was like one of Jay's books or something that he had left behind at his aunt's house. That poem is beautiful. So if you guys didn't get a chance to look it up, like, find it, because it is gorgeous. And then I shared it with like everybody.
It's Audre Lorde, right?
Yep.
Was it her work?
Oh, you can get it. So for the rest of the month, if you're interested in reading this book, the ghost of Chris is talking to us. But if you're interested in reading this book through the end of March, you can read it for free, simultaneous use, which means that anybody, like a million people, could all check it out at the same time, and you would still get to read it. On Hoopla, you can also check out a physical one using BPL to go at bpl.org. Or you can check out the ebook on Overdrive, which is what I did.
Yeah, once I return my copy.
Yeah, I definitely don't have my Kindle disconnected from the internet, so the library can't take my books back.
Fine. All right, so we're going to talk about a couple upcoming events real quick to end things. So a week from today, we have an author visit that will be happening on Zoom with Namina Forna, who wrote The Gilded Ones, which was an instant bestseller. She's a debut author. She's going to be talking about her process writing her first book, publishing her first book, as well as some of like West African mythology that inspired her book. Participants will be able to ask her questions throughout. It should be a really good time. So we hope to see you there. You can register at the link in the chat or at bpl.org/events. And then Allie has an event to talk about.
Yeah, so the following week on April 1st, and this is not a joke, don't be a fool and miss out. I have to make sure that Chris gets, he feels at home here in this stream with some puns. But yes, we'll be doing an awesome chat right here on Twitch with the audiobook narrator for the Tristan Strong series. Amir Abdullah, and he is super rad. He's going to talk about his own career, getting into like audio work and voice acting, all the way up through when he recorded Tristan Strong and what that has looked like. And we're going to get a little tour of his home setup as well. So that's going to be really cool. That'll be at 3 o'clock on April 1st. Not a prank. It's really going to happen.
Yes. Both of these are.
I can hear
very
him like
cool.
trying not to laugh in the headset.
Oh.
And then our last one is just our next book for our book discussions is going to be in April, and it is The Fire Never Goes Out, which is like a graphic essay, memoir, drawings, all sorts of different media by an artist, creator, writer. She has done all sorts of things. So if you're interested in participating in one of these, but maybe are intimidated by a full novel, this would be a good one to hop on board with.
I'm sure Steven can pop in the chat because I don't remember the exact name of it, but the author Noelle Stevenson recently had a series that people were really excited getting turned into a TV show not happen.
Mona.
Yes. And I believe she also created She-Ra and the Princesses of Power.
Yes.
So
she's done many cool things.
come read her book, then talk about it with us.
Same place, same time, same third Thursday of the month. But that is all we've got for you guys. Thank you for joining us or for watching this later on YouTube. And we'll see you hopefully next week and the week after, and then in April.
Ooh, it just never stops. It never stops. The fun never stops.
Bye.
Chris told us to wave. That's why we're all doing it all at once. Chris is like,
In the night, the skies could always start to spark. Into many eyes, dark places turn to light. With the switches side to side. We in the night, hidden from the light. In the night, the skies could always start to spark. Into many eyes, dark places turn to light. With the switches side to side. We in the night, hidden from the light. Fear's sake, some of us might never see a brighter day. No mistakes, isn't too realistic, vicious kind of shades. Paper planes, got below the stars, it's deep off in the main. Vivid pain, blinded by the rays, still we love the shade. I've been up, I've been down, sometimes I question myself. Sometimes I can't see what's left, what if loving never helped? Loving caused me stress, you never loved me like you said. Solitary left me broken hearted, prophecy is dead. In the night, the skies could always start to spark. Into many eyes, dark places turn to light. With the switches side to side. We in the night, hidden from the light. In the night, the skies could always start to spark. Into many eyes, dark places turn to light. With the switches side to side. We in the night, hidden from the light. Vicious kind of shades. Vivid pain, blinded by the rays, still we love the shade. Sometimes I question myself. What if loving never helped? Solitary left me broken hearted, prophecy is dead. In the night, the skies could always start to spark. Into many eyes, dark places turn to light. With the switches side to side. We in the night, hidden from the light. switching side to side. We in the night, hidden from the light. I fear to say, some of us might never see a brighter day. No mistakes, isn't too realistic, vicious kind of shades. Paper planes, grab it low, the stars is deep off in the main. Vivid pain, blinded by the rays, still we love the shade. I've been up, I've been down, sometimes I question myself. Sometimes I can't see what's left, what if loving never helped? Loving caused me stress, you never loved me like you said. Solitary left me